There are no fireworks, confetti cannons, or balloons as I push Mom's wheelchair through the double doors we'd entered nearly 2 months ago. She does not exhibit joy or elation. Mom may be cancer-free and no longer crippled by fluid pressure on her brain, but she is far from healed. This is the opening of the first moment I included for August 28th in my book, Losing Linda May, a Cancer Caregiving Memoir, when my mom has finally been released from the hospital that she was initially admitted to for an autologous stem cell transplant. Now, having gone through an extended hospitalization myself, also for an autologous stem cell transplant, I do really feel like this sums up the experience of finally leaving your hospital room and the special care unit that you've been cooped up in, because you really feel like you should be getting all this applause as you're leaving. People should be celebrating you. You should get a prize for making it through all the torture that you endured. But it's really anticlimactic. You just leave. That's it. In a lot of ways, my mom actually leaving the hospital was kind of the celebration itself, because there was a period of time when we didn't know if that would ever happen. She had developed that subdural hematoma, which required a craniotomy, which scared the shit out of us. We were worried that could end her life. And that didn't. It was successful, but then an emergency craniotomy was needed a couple days later because the subdural hematoma was refilling. And then she fell into this catatonic state, which we were calling a depressive coma. She needed to have a nasogastric intubation because she wasn't eating herself. So we were really wondering, as her caregivers, if she even wanted to live anymore and if she would actually die in this hospital, because we would have to pull life support, which sounds crazy, but it was running through our minds given everything that was going on. So to us, it was this big hurdle that we had overcome. But to her, I don't think it was that momentous, because she then had to get transferred to a rehabilitation hospital. So she wasn't even going home. And that was the same for me, though to a much lesser extent. After my autologous stem cell transplant, I had to go stay at this recovery hotel that was still on the campus of UCLA, just in case I took a drastic downturn, but also because I still had to do a lot of routine blood work immediately in the days following my discharge. For both my mom and me, this transitional period was really defined by easing back into reality, because we didn't have to go back home where we didn't have access to medical providers if there was an emergency and we needed help. It was also more so for my mom because she was going back to Wichita, Kansas, which is where she lived normally. So even though she wasn't in her physical home, she was able to be surrounded by her loved ones and friends who weren't as easily able to see her in Omaha, Nebraska. So that was a breath of fresh air for my mom. But it was also a reintroduction to this idea that life had continued in her absence and that all these things were going on in other people's lives. And that is what my mom loved. Before she had cancer, all she liked to do was hear other people's stories. She was a listener. She was that really thoughtful person who would take in information and give you back something that felt really meaningful. So by reintroducing that, it was a form of rehabilitation itself to her. Another major indication that you're re-entering the real world is the fact that you are no longer connected to an IV pole at all times, and you don't have tubing everywhere, and you don't have a PICC line or a Hickman line that is dangling out of your body. You are liberated in that sense. And that also means that when you go and take a shower, if you're physically capable, you can even spin around. Good Lord, what a miracle. And then you also have that opportunity to start thinking about your appearance again, which I know for some people is an annoyance and a burden, but for most people, it's that opportunity to really define yourself again, to put clothes on that make you feel good about yourself, that are comfortable in a way that a hospital gown certainly is not. And it also allows you to see yourself in the mirror, not as just another patient, but you see who you are again. You're coming back to that reality that you once knew before you were hospitalized. For those who are completing a hospitalization for a cancer treatment and they're pronounced in remission by the time that they are discharged, there's also this thought that maybe this is actually the end. Maybe I'll never have another infusion of chemotherapy or immunotherapy or have another session of radiation or do another surgery ever again. Maybe this chapter has finally come to a close and I can finally start fresh and I can finally get back to some semblance of normal, a new normal. And then there's, of course, that skepticism, especially if you've gone through a lot of setbacks and have relapsed before, like my mom and I had, where you think maybe this is all just another brief period in time where I feel like I can finally move forward, but then life is going to slap me across the face again, and I'm going to relapse, and I'm going to be back in the hospital doing an even more aggressive form of treatment, or maybe there won't be another treatment for me and I will ultimately pass away from this cancer. So while finally getting discharged for a hospitalization for something like an autologous stem cell transplant is monumental to the person who has just gone through the experience, it can also feel really incremental because they are not only thinking about the road ahead to recovery and getting back to some semblance of normal or a new normal, but they are also contending with the fact that this might not actually be the end. So if you're a caregiver or a loved one for someone who is finally getting out of the hospital, don't be surprised when they're not super overjoyed as they're finally leaving that institution, because it's actually a really surreal feeling with a lot of complex emotions associated with it. And they're also probably dealing with some side effects and definitely some trauma from the experience. So give them the patience and the time that they need to let that reality sink in on their own terms, and don't force positivity on them. In the next video I'll be releasing on August 31st, I'll be talking about reconciling with the toll and the impact of treatment. So hit subscribe, leave any questions in the comments. The link to my book is in the description, and I will see you all then.